All right, Stephanie, all yours.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us during your lunch break. My name is Stephanie Lamore. I am the Senior Manager for Advocacy at AIA National. And we've set up this series with AIA Cincinnati, just a few 30-minute sessions about advocacy, just to try and kind of demystify what advocacy is and how to do it, also how to do it efficiently based on the time that you have. So this is the first in a series. Thanks to everybody who's joining and who's watching the recording. I'm glad you guys are here. I hope you find the information helpful. And of course, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. So let's just dive right in. Just a real quick overview of what we're going to go over today. I'm going to talk very briefly about sort of what advocacy is, about why to do it, and the importance of being engaged in the advocacy process. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time talking about how to find the time to advocate for things. And we'll sort of go over several different things that you can do based on the amount of time that you have available. And then there'll be some time at the end for Q&A. So first, what is advocacy? So one of the things that I share with people regularly is that there really are two types of advocacy. There's the formal, which is what most folks think about, meetings with elected officials and things like that. But then there's also informal advocacy, which is just simply conversations that we all have every day with people when we talk about issues that are important to us. If you're a parent and you have a kid in a local elementary school and you'd like the library to have better books, and you talk to other parents about that, that is also a form of advocacy. So really advocacy is any kind of conversation that you have where you are talking about something that's important to you and kind of trying to garner support for that issue or whatever it might be. When it comes to formal advocacy, there are really four things that have to happen in order for advocacy to be effective. There needs to be a specific position, a specific reason for the action that you're taking or that you want somebody to take, a desired outcome, and an ask. And so, for example, if you're meeting with a legislator, and I'm going to use a real world example in another state where their architecture board is scheduled to be sunset, and so they're in the midst of a campaign to support a bill that will allow the board to continue for another 10 years. And so in that case, their specific position is that they support the architecture board and they want the legislature to pass this bill extending the life of the board. Their specific reasons are around the important work that architects do around health, safety, and welfare of the public, the important work of having specific requirements for people who are architects, and that the architecture board is uniquely qualified and positioned to carry out those duties. And again, their specific desired outcome is for this bill to be passed, and their specific ask is for support of the bill. And so having all four of those things is really necessary in order for formal advocacy to be effective. Now, why advocate? And this is something that I hear from folks a lot. There is, unfortunately, a lot of cynicism, well placed in many cases, about just politics and the political process and how effective people really can be in advocacy, and how much it really matters. And what I always tell people is that your voice is way more powerful than you realize. And to demonstrate that, I wanted to share some data, because I'm a big data person, around the effectiveness of different types of advocacy and the influence that they have on elected officials. So this data was collected by a national organization called the Congressional Management Foundation. And their whole purpose is to understand how people interact with Congress, how they communicate with Congress, and how effective those methods of communication are. So about 10 years ago, they conducted a survey where they interviewed, it was over 1,000 legislative staffers on the Hill to get it and talk to them about the ways that members of Congress make decisions. And what they found is that for a legislator who is uncertain, who doesn't have a position already, the types of communication that were the most effective were communications that came from constituents. So as you can see from the graph here, the most effective was an in-person visit. A contact from a constituent rep was also very effective, and then emails and letters and things like that. But as you can see, the top 4 things on this list are communications from constituents, not from lobbyists or things like that. Lobbyists are still very effective, as you can see from the graphic, but not as effective as a constituent. And that's the point that I am always wanting to drive home to people, is that we have so much more influence than we realize, and especially when we're speaking collectively, when we're speaking with a unified voice, and it isn't just one person, but it's a dozen people or 50 or 100. It really makes an impact on the decisions that elected officials make. And then again, just one more about, excuse me, about the types of information that are most helpful for a member of Congress, for an elected official to understand their constituents' views and opinions. And again, meetings with constituents is right at the top of the list. Elected officials they really do want to understand what their constituents are dealing with, the issues that they're affected by, how they feel about those issues, and all of that. So tell them, reach out and, make a phone call, have a meeting, and talk to them about those things, because you can be key in helping them arrive at a decision around a particular policy or a piece of legislation or something like that. And so now to the big question, which is, how do I find the time? And this is another one that I hit on a lot with folks, because I think there's a misunderstanding that advocacy has to be an in-person meeting or something that that takes a lot of time. And while those in-person meetings are great and they are very effective, they are certainly not the only way that you can advocate. And again, when several people are advocating through all of these different channels, that sort of aggregate action, that collective action, can really have an influence on the decisions that elected officials make. And so what I've done is break down. I've broken down the different types of advocacy, the different actions people can take, and broken them down by the amount of time that it takes to do them. And the great thing about this is that it means if you want to take action around a particular issue, and you only have a finite amount of time, you only have a small window, you can kind of look to this list and pick something, that fits within 5 or 10 or 30 minutes. So, here on this list, you can see if you've got 5 minutes, you can sign a petition, send an email, sign up to get alerts about a particular issue. If you've gotten an email campaign or something like that, you can forward that email to other people. You can share it with others. And these are very quick actions. And most of them, frankly, don't even take 5 minutes. They take a lot less time than that, maybe just a minute or two. And it's a quick thing that you can do that adds your voice to the conversation, which is one of the main purposes of advocacy is to make sure that you're heard. And these are just some simple and quick ways that you can do that, and make sure that your voice is part of that that decision-making process. And when it comes to something like sending an email, you can send it as part of an email campaign that you've gotten from somebody. You can also just send one on your own. Most, especially at the state level, it's fairly easy to find email addresses for elected officials and regulatory folks and people like that. And so if you have their email address, you can send an email on your own too. It doesn't have to be part of a campaign. You can send just a quick, hey, I'm your constituent, and I wanted to flag this issue for you. It's really important to me. And the email can be part of a request to have an in-person meeting, or to see if you can schedule a phone call with somebody, but it also doesn't have to be. It can be a very simple, I'm your constituent, I care about this issue, and here's the action that I would like you to take around this issue. If you have a little bit longer, if you've got 10 minutes or so, you can make a phone call. You can talk to a friend or a colleague about the issue, which again, it is a form of advocacy. You can post on social media, watch a short training video, or read a short article about your particular issue. And those last two, the training videos and reading articles and information, those are two that, as we go through the rest of these slides, you'll see repeated often, because they are so important. I've been doing advocacy for over a decade now at this point. And I still watch training videos. I still read about best practices, because trends change over time, and staying on top of those is important for me if I want to stay effective in my job. And the same is true of policy issues. The trends change, information changes around environmental issues, or building codes, whatever it might be. And so taking 5 or 10 minutes to watch a video about either an issue, or even about how to be a better advocate, or reading a short article about those things, just kind of helps you up your game a little bit, I guess, is the best way to say that. If you've got half an hour, you can have a Zoom call with a legislator or staff. Zoom calls and Teams meetings were all the rage during the height of the pandemic, because nobody was going into the office. In-person meetings weren't possible anymore with legislators. But even now, as state legislatures have opened back up, a lot of lawmakers and staff are still willing and very interested in still having Zoom calls, because they're so efficient. It gives them a way to communicate with a broader, just a broader range of their constituents. Their interaction isn't just limited to folks who can show up and have a face-to-face meeting. So take time to have a call with a legislator or staff person. And again, you can take time and write a little bit of a longer personalized email about a certain issue or concern. And again, watching the training videos, reading more about your issue. 30 minutes is to be reading about something is more than just a newspaper article. I mean, at that point, you could be reading some research or something like that. And the benefit of that is that as you continue to advocate for your issue, whatever it might be, everything that you read, everything that you watch, becomes part of the conversation that you have with lawmakers and their staff. And the more informed you are, the more that's going to come across, and the more comfortable you'll feel, more than likely, having those conversations, because you'll just feel like you're in a position to really share some information. It doesn't mean you have to know everything. You don't have to have answers to every question. And in fact, it's better if you don't. If you're having a conversation with a legislator or their staff, and they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, the great thing about that is it gives you the perfect excuse to follow up. So don't feel like you have to know all of the answers, but at the same time, do take time to read and to watch training videos and things like that around advocacy and around the issues that you really care about. If you've got an hour, You can write a short public comment letter. And of course, this is relevant for things like building code updates and those types of things. You can meet in person with a legislator or staff. And, you know, the 60 minutes is just sort of an average. You know, some of that time is going to depend on, of course, how close you are to their office. But meeting in person will take a little more time than just opening up your computer and having a Zoom call. You can participate in other advocacy trainings like this one. And again, continue to read about the issue, learn more about advocacy. You can also take time to write and submit an op-ed or a letter to the editor. And these can be really influential for state lawmakers, especially if it's something that gets published in a local paper. For example, I live in Falls Church City, Virginia, and I see on a regular, we have a local paper that has a circulation of maybe 11,000. It's pretty small. And I regularly see letters to the editor that are directed at my congressman. And it's a common practice because it's well known that legislators read those local papers because they're trying to stay up to date on what's happening with their constituents, what's happening in the communities they represent. And so it's a really good way to share a message without having the actual in-person meeting. If you have more than an hour, you can write a very thorough public comment letter. And again, a good in-depth public comment letter can take a couple of hours. It can take a while to write, but it is something that you can do to advocate for something that you really care about. And again, meeting in person with a legislator or their staff. If you live a little further away, it's going to take a little longer than an hour. If they need help, you can also offer to help the Cincinnati team strategize and plan around some of their advocacy. That will take a little more time and require a little more involvement. But if you have it, it's a great way to spend your time. And then you can also attend public hearings, city council meetings, commission meetings, things like that. It's a really good way to not only hear what's going on, but start to build relationships with some of those folks. Make sure they get to know your face and your name. And then you can also generally, in most of those situations, you can submit comments and then have a couple of minutes to, step up to a microphone and let them know why you're there and what it is that you care about. And so there is a breakdown of some of the things that you can do with advocacy, depending on the amount of time that you have. We've got about 7 minutes left in our half hour, and that's the end of my presentation. So I do want to open it up for questions if anybody has any questions, and then also hand it back to Julie if you've got anything else that you want to add or anything that you want to say, Julie or Chris.
I think if anybody has questions, feel free to unmute and ask. We have a small group, so you're more than welcome to do that. And if you're not comfortable with that, you can pop them in the chat.
I did get a question about, can you please describe what the public comment letter is or how it's different than an op-ed, which is a really good question. So a public comment letter is generally they're written in response to a proposed rulemaking or a proposed change in regulation. So for example, at the federal level, our federal team gets regular updates from the Federal Register, which is where federal agencies, the Department of Education, the EPA, agencies like that will publish a proposed regulatory change. And it's generally a requirement. I know it's a requirement in Virginia. I don't know if that's true in every state, but in most states, there is a requirement that if a regulation is going to be changed, it has to be open for public comment for a certain amount of time. And so when that public comment period is open, you can write a response. And in most instances, anybody can write a response. It doesn't have to be an organization. It doesn't have to be it's not limited in who can submit those. And it can take a little more time because, again, you're talking about, a regulatory change that requires a little bit of research and things like that. But, for example, if Ohio proposed, a regulatory change to eliminate building energy codes, you could submit a public comment, making the argument for why that's a bad idea and what the benefits are of having effective building energy codes in place. And so that's how it's different from an op-ed, where an op-ed goes to a newspaper. A public comment is generally in response to a proposed regulatory change. But great question.
Hey, Julie, I was trying to type this right now, but it's easier to say it, I guess. If I signed up for this Zoom today, am I automatically signed up for the whole series here, or do I have to re-sign up for Monday?
You have to re-sign up for
Each one of them. Okay, no
Each one
problem. Because I will. Just want to make sure.
Howard, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Yes, I had a question. What do you recommend when the local person has an extreme political affiliation that's different from yours? How do you try to communicate with them when you know that they've got a much more extreme view?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question that we get a lot these days, unfortunately. And generally what I advise people is to see if there is common ground, to see if there are areas that you all can work on together. It can really be a challenge to try to build a good working relationship with a legislator whose views are extremely different from yours. But really I think the thing that is the most the deciding factor really in that is it's less about how extreme their views are and more about whether or not they're willing to work with people who don't agree with them. If they're not, that's a tough, that's a tough problem to solve. If their views are their views and they're not willing to consider alternatives, they're not willing to work with people who have different views, then yeah, that can be really tough. And I think at that point, the best thing that you can do is try to find others who share your view on the particular topic, and see if you can put kind of a mini campaign together, to pressure the office. It may, there's no guarantee that something like that will work, but I always think that it's worth trying, especially because I think the worst thing that we can do is, if we know that our representative or, whoever it might be, has extreme views that are different from ours, I think the worst thing we can do is be quiet. I think they need to know that they have people in their district who disagree with them. And of course, you want to do that respectfully, but let them know that you disagree, because you are also their constituent and they have a responsibility to figure out how to serve you because that's their job. They may not view that as their job, but I feel like that's all the more reason to remind them that it is, to remind them that they have constituents who have different viewpoints, and that your expectation is that they will find a middle ground that is, that's beneficial to as many people as possible. Again, it can be a hard challenge to solve because some folks just aren't willing to consider, they're just not willing to consider other viewpoints or other, policy positions. But I still think it's important to ask and to make the argument, especially if you can get other people to do it with you, because I think we need to remind them at every opportunity that they have a responsibility to represent everybody in their district and not just the people who agree with them. And that might make their path forward a little tougher as a lawmaker, but that's also what they signed on for when they ran for office. So yeah, I hope that helps. I know it can be tough, but those are generally the things that I recommend.
Thank you.
Real quick, Steph, I appreciate your time. I know we're almost up against 12:30.
Yeah, we are.
Really appreciate you going through. Honestly, I think this is, I think a lot of us on this call have been involved for a while as well. And these kind of things are always good reminders. I would encourage everyone on this call to invite at least one or two more people to the next session. They're meant to be kind of one after the other, but this session will also be available. We may offer this again. Hopefully people find it valuable, but obviously the more people we can have as part of the discussion, the better. But again, Stephanie, really appreciate your time to put this together.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you guys for having me. I look forward to the next couple sessions.
Thank you, Stephanie. And for those of you on the call, I've been putting the links for the various sessions in the chat. So, and they're also all on our website. Feel free to sign up for those. Thank you.